Hola chicos, bienvenidos. Mi nombre es Juani. If you're looking to get conversational in Spanish for 2025, of course, you're probably already aware there are a few things you will need to be familiar with. Some basic phrases like ¿Cómo estás? Estoy bien. Soy Juani. ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿De dónde eres? ¿Cómo se dice en español? Hasta luego, etc. Also, another very important thing, of course, which you're probably already aware of, is practicing your pronunciation, in particular, getting familiar with the Spanish vowels. A, E, I, O, and U. Now, don't get me wrong, yes, these are very, very important in learning Spanish. However, for me personally, there were two main things in particular which proved the difference between getting to that conversational level of Spanish and not getting there. The first thing is getting rid of your ego. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is be prepared to make a lot, and I mean a lot, of mistakes, and at times be prepared to look stupid. I've oftentimes spoken previously about how one time I was in the gym and I simply wanted to say in Spanish that I was hot, so I said estoy caliente without actually realizing that estoy caliente in Spanish actually means I'm turned on or I'm horny. Now, it's safe to say on that particular occasion I learnt my lesson pretty quickly with that one, but in short, when I first started learning Spanish, I wanted to get everything right and I was too embarrassed to actually make a mistake without actually realizing that when you want to learn anything, let alone a language, making mistakes is of course very important and very crucial and just a normal part of the process of learning something new. So getting rid of your ego or your fear of making mistakes is very crucial in order to become conversational in Spanish. Moving forward, the second thing, which was a real game changer for me in order to become conversational in Spanish, was learning compound phrases, in particular with these three verbs. The verbs querer, to want, poder, to be able to or can, and tener, to have. I guarantee you, if you can become comfortable with these three verbs in particular, using them in compound phrases, your conversational skills in Spanish will improve dramatically. Por ejemplo, ¿qué quieres hacer hoy? Quiero ir al cine. Tengo que estudiar esta noche. No puedo ir a la fiesta. Now, before we move on, what we'll do in this video is we'll break these compound phrases down grammatically so that you understand them correctly. Then what we'll do at the end is we'll go through some exercises so that you can practice them. And then by the end of this video, you'll be ready to go out there and try using these compound phrases in an actual conversation in Spanish. First of all, why are compound phrases so important in regards to getting to a conversational level of Spanish? Now, the reason it's so important is because as a native English speaker, it makes our job a lot easier because we don't have to memorize as many verb conjugations using compound phrases. For example, if I wanted to say in Spanish, I want to learn Spanish, I would say, quiero aprender español. Quiero aprender español. I want to learn Spanish. So notice, first of all, we're using the verb querer, to want. Now we've conjugated the verb querer in the yo form by saying quiero, which means I want. But then notice how the verb aprender is in its unchanged infinitive form. So it's unchanged because in Spanish, we've already conjugated the first verb, querer, to signal I want. So we don't need to conjugate the verb aprender because in Spanish, it's already clear who it is that we're speaking about. We're speaking about ourselves. So this is a quick example of a compound phrase and why it's so useful because we don't have to conjugate that second verb. Pretty simple, isn't it? Now let's try another example. If I wanted to say, I want to go to the beach, I would simply say, quiero ir a la playa. Quiero ir a la playa. Notice how I've just conjugated the verb querer in the yo form, yo quiero, so I want. I then don't have to change the verb ir. I can just leave it in its unchanged infinitive form because it's already clear in the conversation who I'm speaking about. I'm speaking about myself. I want to go to the beach. Now, to start with, I would recommend just getting familiar with the yo and the tu conjugations of these verbs, querer, tener, and poder, because as you start to have conversations in Spanish, most of the time you're just going to be talking in the yo form, so about yourself, or the tu form, about the person that you're speaking with. And then once you become more comfortable with those forms, then as your language and your conversations start to improve and your vocabulary starts to improve, then you can start getting familiar with the other conjugations of these verbs. Now, with that being said, the yo and the tu conjugations of the verb querer are yo quiero, so yo quiero, I want, and tú quieres. Tú quieres, you want. So before we move on, remember those conjugations. If I wanted to say, I want to go to the beach, quiero ir a la playa. Or if I wanted to say, do you want to go to the beach, quieres ir a la playa. Quieres ir a la playa. Moving forward, another very important verb that you want to be familiar with is the verb tener, to have. Por ejemplo, tengo dos hijas. Tengo dos hijas. I have two daughters. Or a key difference between Spanish and English, if I wanted to say I am 35 in English, I would actually say in Spanish, tengo 35 años. Tengo 35 años. I am 35, or in Spanish, I have 35 years. Let's take a quick look at those conjugations in the yo and the tu form. And the verb tener is irregular as well, just like the verb querer. So we've got yo tengo, so I have, or tú tienes, so you have. Moving on to compound phrases though, the reason why the verb tener is so powerful is because it's exactly the same as how we express in English obligations, or when we have to do something. In Spanish, we'd also use the verb tener in this scenario. For example, if I wanted to say, I have to study tonight, I would say, tengo que estudiar esta noche. Tengo que estudiar esta noche. I have to study tonight. Notice how I've got the verb estudiar in its infinitive unchanged form. However, one other thing you'll notice is that I've got que after the verb tener. So why is that? The reason that is because a grammatical rule with the verb tener, when you're expressing what you have to do or an obligation, we do have to use the verb tener, que, and then we can add on the other verb in its unchanged infinitive form. For example, I have to walk, tengo que caminar. I have to speak, tengo que hablar. I have to go, tengo que ir. As you can see, it might be useful with the verb tener when you want to express compound phrases and express obligations that you have to do. Might be easier to just memorize the verb tener, que, plus the other verb that you want to use. I know it might be a little bit confusing as well, but just remember, we do have similar grammatical rules in English as well. For example, if I wanted to say, I want to help, notice how I have to put to in between the verbs want and help. However, in English, if I want to say, I can help, notice how I don't have to put to in between the two verbs there, can and help on that occasion. So there are similar rules with particular verbs in Spanish as well. But luckily, the verb tener in this scenario in compound phrases expressing obligations, it's so common that you'll quickly clue on to having to say que after the verb tener. Por ejemplo, tengo que aprender español. I have to learn Spanish. Tengo que ir al supermercado. I have to go to the supermarket. Tienes que practicar conmigo. You have to practice with me. Moving forward, another very important verb in Spanish with compound phrases, of course, is the verb poder, to be able to, or think of it as can in English. So the conjugations are yo puedo. So as you can see, they're irregular as well. Yo puedo and tú puedes. So tú puedes. For example, can I help? Puedo ayudar. Puedo ayudar. Or I can't find the shop. No puedo encontrar la tienda. No puedo encontrar la tienda. Now, before we finish, I'm sure this is starting to make some sense to you right now, but what we're going to do is we're going to go through a few exercises. So what I'm going to do is give you a compound phrase in English, and I want you to translate it for me into Spanish. If you can as well, I would encourage you to say it out loud so you can also practice your pronunciation. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to come up with the answer. However, if you do need a little bit more time, please feel free to hit pause on the video. Also, if you are getting any value from these videos, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. First up, how would you say in Spanish, I want to buy something? So I want to buy something. On this occasion, you'd say, quiero comprar algo. Quiero comprar algo. So again, conjugating the verb querer, to want, in the yo form, which is quiero. We've then got the verb comprar, which is to buy algo, something. Next up, I have to practice my Spanish. I have to practice my Spanish. How would you say that? This time you'd say, tengo que practicar mi español. Tengo que practicar mi español. So again, conjugating the verb tener in the yo form, tengo. Then we've got que straight after that. Practicar, the verb to practice, mi español. Next up, how would you say, can I study with you? So can I study with you? This time you'd say, puedo estudiar contigo. Puedo estudiar contigo. Great job, everyone. Now I'd encourage you to try and give some of these compound phrases a go in the next few conversations you have in Spanish. As always, if I can be of any assistance with anything else, please don't hesitate to leave a comment or a question in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video. Hasta pronto.